All right, here we go. Okay, cool. Hey, you guys, good to see you. I guess I don't really see you. This is on demand, but I will know when you are there. So that's cool. I am officially moved to Virginia. So this is part of my new office, still working on getting the rest of it furnished. But um, yeah, so here we are. I am so glad that you guys decided to watch this particular webinar. I'd kind of been doing a few on eating disorders, and so I really wanted to do one specific on anxiety because, for one thing, I love working with someone on anxiety. It's one of my favorite things to treat, and it also happens to be something that I can really relate a lot to. And so not always in counseling, but sometimes it's okay to share personal experience. And so at times I will share with clients kind of my own experiences with different aspects of anxiety. Hopefully it helps them. That's really the best context to share it. So I'm also going to share a little bit of that with you guys, and hopefully it's helpful in whatever context. So whether you're watching this as a person with anxiety, as someone who knows someone with anxiety, or as another provider who treats anxiety, hopefully you get something out of all of this. As always, this is a webinar simply designed to educate. It is not meant to replace therapy. It's not meant to replace supervision or anything like that. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen with you guys. All right, we got this in. Here's my play. Okay, here we go. Cool. All right, good. And I'm just going to leave my little video up there. Someone told me that they would rather have that than no video. So we will do that. So how to make anxiety work for you. And we'll kind of go into this a little bit in the webinar about why, but in general, I just am a real big believer that the more that we try to get rid of emotions, the more emotional suffering we are likely to cause for ourselves. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but in general, I think that's my belief. So I really wanted to utilize this webinar to, first of all, really normalize a lot about anxiety, and secondly, to give some ideas of how to reframe anxiety to a point where it becomes helpful for you and where it doesn't really get in the way of life. So my name is Meredith Riddick. I'm a licensed professional counselor in both Texas and Virginia. I'm also a certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor for that. So anxiety is one of those things where I have a lot of experience working in, whether it's just in general or a lot of times it accompanies an eating disorder. I want to say over 85 or 90% of individuals with eating disorders also have some kind of subclinical or clinical anxiety disorder. So I work with it a ton and may or may not know a thing or two about anxiety myself. Okay. So let's just make sure that we're on the same page and talking about the same thing whenever it comes to anxiety. So one thing is that anxiety really presents in different forms. Just because of the scope of this presentation, we're just going to cover a few, but it's definitely not an exhaustive list. Have you ever heard that people who have anxiety tend to live in the future and people with depression tend to live in the past? I heard that for the first time maybe like 10 years ago, and it was like eye-opening for me, like, oh my gosh, yes, Now, a lot of times, someone can have depression that feeds into anxiety, and sometimes anxiety can feed into depression. But at the end of the day, definitely an individual or individuals who have a hard time staying in the moment. Most anxiety is future focused. There's a saying I heard from another therapist that is, the anticipation is worse than the actual event. So you may have someone in your life with anxiety, or client, or maybe you relate to this yourself, where you have something, an event coming up, but that you're just really dreading and you're trying to figure out ways to get out of it, but somehow you get talked into it, or you go anyway and you come out of it going like, oh, that actually wasn't so bad. I can relate to this in the sense of I really don't like to fly on an airplane. And I wouldn't say I have a phobia at all, you know, by no means. I know that there are individuals who do genuinely have a phobia, and I don't want to put myself in that category and kind of minimize what others experience. But in general, I really don't like to fly. You know, I kind of just have these thoughts of, you know, gosh, well, what if something happened and blah, blah, blah. It's not really the way I want to go, you know? And but what I noticed is, but I do fly because it's important to me. I would never be able to see my friends or go to conferences or, you know, for a little over a year, my husband lived in a different state. I wouldn't have been able to see him, you know. So I go because of my values. I do fly, but you know, once I'm at the airport and on the airplane, I hardly think twice about it. So kind of this idea that anticipating something in the future is usually worse than actually engaging in that thing. So is that something that you guys relate to? Do you see that in your clients? So general anxiety or worry often focuses on the what if questions related to many different topics. What if something doesn't go as planned? What if this person doesn't like me anymore? What if something terrible happens? It may focus on something that happened in the past, but the anxiety part is really about the perceived future outcome of that event. Okay. So let's look at some examples. So it might be someone who says in their head, I gave a presentation to 3 of my bosses this morning and realized afterwards that I kept mispronouncing this one word. Now, what if they're all laughing at me behind my back? Or what if I get demoted or fired? Oh, I did that too fast. Okay, I need to talk about this. Yeah, so you kind of get the idea. You know, this is an event that happened in the past, but upon reflection, someone's going into those what if questions. We see this a lot with generalized anxiety disorder. There's a lot of ruminative thoughts, or like ruminating thoughts. And I kind of, when someone's like, well, what is that? What do you mean by that? I just kind of say this is really more like you keep playing a tape in your head over and over and over. You're playing that reel of what happened. You're playing the scene over and over. So it happened in the past, but you keep doing that over the day, over the next few days, over the next week, something like that. So often individuals with generalized anxiety disorder or just some aspect of general anxiety often do this with different topics in their life. If you're like me, it tends to come up more in times of stress. So if I'm stressed about other things in life, I'm more likely to exhibit anxiety in things that aren't necessarily stressing me out. Okay. Okay, now on to the next slide. So obsessive compulsive struggles may be best defined by this: obsessions increase anxiety and compulsions decrease anxiety. So both of these things could be thoughts, they could be rituals, they could be behaviors. There's often a perceived outcome of the obsession that is so undesirable, the individual engages in the compulsion to emotionally regulate. Although this usually only helps temporarily, for that individual, it can often feel better to the individual than just sitting with the obsession. So for example, if I use a public restroom, I could get some horrible disease and die. If I don't have another choice, I'll cover the whole seat in toilet paper, not actually touch the seat at all, and wash my hands exactly 10 times with hot water and soap afterward. Okay. So this might be something that an individual with diagnosable OCD kind of goes through. And you may never know that this is a thought that they are having. It might just be you think, oh, okay, yeah, this person, yeah, they tend to like, you know, take their time in the bathroom, no big deal, you know. But in reality, there's a lot of internal distress over something like this. Social anxiety can be a paralyzing fear of social appraisal. So let's be honest, some of this may result from a previous horrible experience. I totally get that. I am definitely not trying to make up that it doesn't. So for some of these individuals, it may not focus as much on a perceived outcome as much as an outcome they've already experienced. Although for others, it may focus more on a perceived outcome. It can be hard to get swept under the rug of being shy or reserved, which might serve to invalidate that individual's previous negative experience or trauma. So it might just be like, oh yeah, she's just really quiet. When in reality, maybe she had a really horrible, public speaking appearance, 2 years before. Maybe something she remembers in kindergarten, it could be anything. So this type of anxiety involves a lot of avoidance or a tremendous amount of distress to get through an event of possible scrutiny. So it might be someone who tries to get out of certain things, or it could be someone who just, they'll do it, but it is under so much distress, it's hardly tolerable. It often focuses on perceived outcomes that do not match the actual event. So it could be like a child who gets physically ill before a group performance at school, such as a choir or a band concert. I remember this from my very best friend growing up. She has a great voice, a great singer, but man, whenever we had it, and she definitely wouldn't do any solos, but whenever we had a group performance, and I don't, and she didn't really anticipate this happening, but she would get a pretty bad stomach ache the morning of the performance. And so her mom would have to call the choir director and say that she wouldn't be there. So something like that. Could also be an individual who does give a presentation to a group of peers and exhibits anxiety in various ways, such as excessive sweating, increased heart rate, perhaps stuttering or stammering. Although I do want to be clear, sometimes those things are a separate concern. So, but just giving examples of what this might look like. All right, you guys with me? We got panic attacks. Take a deep breath. This is a big one. Individuals who suffer from panic attacks often feel like they might be dying. There's a shortness of breath, a rapid heart rate, feeling physically ill or dizzy, some different symptoms like that. Usually it will reach its peak within 10 minutes, but it's possible it can last longer. If it lasts longer, it might fall a little bit more under an anxiety attack. There's a little bit of difference, but at the end of the day, if you are someone or you work with a client who has panic attacks, you know that this can be so scary for that person. They could be out of nowhere, or they might be a bit of a buildup. There could be a specific trigger. I notice a lot of times with my clients, there's not necessarily a specific trigger. And it might be looking like the individual is having a heart attack or got their breath knocked out of them, something like that. There are some individuals who have kind of more, maybe I would say milder panic attacks where they doesn't necessarily look like they're having a heart attack, but they've had them long enough that they kind of adjust in different ways so that people around them don't even know that they're having them. So it might be removing themselves from a situation if they can quickly feel it coming on, or turning away, or something like that. Okay, so now that we're on the same page, at least for the purpose of this webinar, what are we talking about making anxiety work for us? Because all of this sounds like it's no fun, that's for sure. So why wouldn't we just try and get rid of it? So like I said, I'm a really big believer that all emotions serve a purpose. Anxiety being often out of fear, things like that, it may serve to protect and guard us. A sense of numbing out serves to comfort or soothe us. Another emotion of sadness may serve to honor a connection we have with another person. It could be, right, like if you have a close friend or family member pass away, I mean, if you genuinely felt no sadness out of that, it might look like you really didn't have a strong connection with that person. And that's different from just feeling so uncomfortable that you just don't want to show your sadness, okay? But these kinds of things that may be really normal to feel sad in those situations. And there's a reason why that person was really important in our lives. So same kind of thing, anxiety can serve to protect us in some way, or possibly show others simply how much we care. It's not a bad thing for people to know we're anxious about an upcoming presentation, because it shows we actually care about our jobs, their time, our company, etc. So like, for example, if I, were a CEO of like a marketing firm or a PR firm, and I had like a brand new employee who was fresh out of college or something like that, just didn't have as much experience, and they were about to give their first presentation in front of like the board, or maybe just a group of more seasoned peers. If they were to come up to me and say, oh yeah, I got this, don't even worry about it. Yep, I don't need you to look at anything. This is totally fine. Now, granted, sometimes that might be okay. That might just be a sign of confidence, and this person feels good about that, and maybe they are extra talented. But apart from those exceptions, if it were me, I'd be really worried about that. I'd be kind of thinking like, why isn't this person more anxious about this or nervous about it, right? Because a lot of times anxiety and nervousness really shows how much we care. I would be thinking, oh, good, this person values, you know, the time of the board, or this person values that they make our company look good, not having that might possibly send me the message that they are overconfident. Maybe they just don't know the questions to ask. Maybe it's kind of like, you don't know what you don't know kind of thing, so there's this overconfidence but undercompetence. So it could be something like that. So I don't know. I mean, there's some things that, it's really normal to be anxious in certain situations. Think about a first date, like if you weren't nervous about a first date or something like that, it might send the message that you're just really confident and sure of yourself, but it could also send the message that maybe you don't care. Maybe it could look like a sign of indifference or something like that, right? So it's good to kind of break things down in terms of how are we coming across with our anxiety and what does that mean? But other times anxiety really gets to a debilitating level where it interferes with our functioning. It doesn't necessarily enhance it. So this could be, the person fresh out of college who's working for this firm who, has this presentation in front of a board. They get there and they just totally freeze, and they forget everything they were going to say, or maybe they don't even show up. Maybe they give their resignation an hour before the presentation, something like that, right? It's going to get in the way of functioning. So how do we do that? How do we honor and validate anxiety, but manage it so that it doesn't prevent us from living our life and living out our values? That is the question. So I have a few different steps just to kind of consider. Step one is basically acknowledging the anxiety or that it is present in whatever form. So this can be done before, during, or after. Sometimes hindsight is the best teacher. So sometimes, if you are in a situation where you just weren't really aware of the anxiety, or didn't notice it until after the fact, acknowledge it then. Acknowledge that, oh, that was anxiety. I think that that's one thing I've experienced in my adult life. Had you asked me whenever I was a teenager, or maybe even early in college, if anxiety was the emotion I experienced a lot, I would have said not really. Partly because I think I didn't really identify, well, probably because I didn't really know all what it was. I think I didn't identify with it. I think I would have maybe thought it was not good to have or something like that, and I would have cared too much about how I came across. But one of the things I've noticed in my adult life as it's become more clear to me is that I often don't notice my anxiety as an emotion. I notice it after the fact in the form of my body, that I have a stomach ache, that that I'm having a hard time going to sleep at night, things like that. And so just being able to acknowledge, oh, that might be anxiety. Okay. Or just even if you're in that moment where you do know it's anxiety, saying, okay, oh, this is anxiety. I know what this feels like. Just kind of speaking it out loud, just acknowledging it is step one. Step two might be asking ourselves, what is the anxiety trying to do for me? What's it trying to tell me? So it might be trying to regulate your emotion. It might be trying to soothe. It might be trying to tell you that, hey, this upcoming presentation or choir concert or whatever is a really big deal. This is really cool that you get to do all of this. Let's make sure that we're prepared and we do as good of a job as we can, right? It could be that, hey, this person you're about to go on a date with is someone that you really care about. And it would be cool if this worked out, right? Something like that. What's the anxiety trying to do for me? Then we can ask ourselves, is there any unmet need? So sometimes our anxiety might be trying to get our attention with doing something for us because there's some need that's going unmet. So it might be like if I'm really anxious about a presentation coming up, it might be an unmet need of feeling safe or feeling confident, something like that. So for others, it could be a sense of safety. It could be a sense of calm. I have an unmet need of calm. I'm constantly feeling stressed or stretched thin in life, whatever it is. So step 3, asking ourselves, is there any unmet need? Step 4, if the answer is yes, then how can I get this need met in a healthy way? So if it were me and I knew in advance that I had some anxiety about an upcoming presentation and I was not really feeling safe or confident, I might ask myself, okay, well, how can I get this need met in a healthy way? An unhealthy way might be just canceling the presentation and, going home and, talking to a friend and that's it. That might be more safe to me. But if I was trying to get this need met in a healthier way, it might be asking a coworker or a colleague, like, hey, do you mind attending this presentation I'm doing and sitting in the front row? I could really use your presence. It would just feel really safe to me because I know that you've really supported me in the work that I'm doing, something like that, right? So that might be one idea. Step 5, if you're feeling really bold, you can thank your body and your mind for allowing you to feel the anxiety, because feeling it and then having options with what we do with it is really a growth opportunity, right? So being able to like kind of, thank the universe in a sense for allowing you to have this growth opportunity. Now, I don't mean growth opportunity the way we sometimes mean it, like in terms of a weakness. I genuinely mean a growth opportunity. If there's something cool to learn here about ourselves, to learn about the environment, maybe to learn about the people around us. All right, so I'll stop beating around the bush. I know you guys are wanting some more practical ideas. So let's keep going and see what else we can come up with. So, what about in the case of general anxiety or worry? First, you can celebrate that you're such an intentional person. Celebrate that you are forward thinking, okay? You can use this as a way to plan, not control. A lot of times planning allows us to feel good about something. It brings us a sense of safety, comfort, stability, whereas controlling something in the future can often bring anxiety. So try and plan in a flexible way, if that's even a thing, which I assure you it is. Planning in a flexible way can help us manage our anxiety, whereas if we try to control the future, it's typically going to be pretty rigid, and that will serve to increase the anxiety. So we're going for flexibility here. So one thing you can do, even if you wanted to do a bit of an exposure to this, if you're going through all those what if questions, what if this happens, maybe answer your question with, yeah, what if this does happen? It could. And just see what that does for the anxiety over time. My husband is like an expert at this with me flying. And, if I'll say, well, what about this? What about this? And he'll say, yeah, that could happen. And I'm just like, hey, that's not what I wanted to hear. And he's like, well, it could. But the reality is that the more I do that, the more he responds in that way and does not serve to kind of give me reassurances. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess it could. What am I going to do about it? And then I move on and I get on the plane and it's a great flight. Okay. So we want to think about this as ways of how can we lean into some of the general anxiety or worry that we have to focus on planning, not over planning, not over preparing, not controlling, but just maybe in a flexible way, like, hey, this would be really cool if we could get this to happen. Let me look up some of these times. Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's aim for that. And if it doesn't work, totally cool. We got plan B, or we can just kind of go with the flow, so kind of some things like that. So speaking of exposures, if you have OCD or obsessions and compulsions and you're in therapy, you probably already have a therapist who does this with you. Or if you are a therapist who treats OCD, you probably already use exposures. If you don't, you're definitely going to want to look up exposure with response prevention, or ERP, which is kind of the treatment of choice for OCD. So doing this with a good therapist, or do this with a good therapist who knows what they're doing if you're someone suffering from OCD. So the exposures are very gradual. So kind of think of it like we're really not trying to drink from a fire hydrant with this kind of stuff, okay? So a lot of times perfectionism can accompany anxiety. And let me tell you, we want to do what's effective, not necessarily what feels good to you. So if you're kind of like a bit of an overachiever, you got to be able to pull back some of that stuff, because doing gradual exposures is going to be more, you can maintain more of the work that you do. It's more more sustainable change. So for example, see what happens when you don't wrap the entire commode in toilet paper and wash your hands 10 times. Just see what happens. You might have that anxiety, but I bet you'll have more time in the day for that funny show you've been wanting to see, or maybe just not being late to your next class or meeting. And, if you're someone who just tries to hold it in for most of the day as much as you can, your bladder and your kidney are going to thank you, or kidneys. I guess you have two kidneys. I guess some people don't, but your bladder and your kidneys will thank you for not trying to avoid going to the bathroom all day long. Okay, so think of it that way. You got to do this stuff over time. Nothing really goes away overnight, okay? But you want to be trying out some of these things. If you genuinely do have obsessive compulsive disorder, definitely do this with a therapist, okay? Radically open DBT. So now we need to break out some good old fashioned RODBT, or maybe it's new fashioned since it's a relatively new theory. Radically open dialectical behavior therapy. So I got trained in this over a year ago, and it has quickly become one of my favorite treatment interventions with clients. Radically open DBT. Now it's new in terms of being manual based and all that, but actually it's been studied for over 2 decades. I won't go into a lot of it. That's a whole nother webinar, but it's basically helping individuals who struggle with more of an over-controlled kind of temperament or personality. So think about someone with social anxiety. This is someone who maybe just, they really avoid the spotlight, or they avoid presentations, or maybe that they thrive in presentations because they feel like they're good at it. So they're more likely to do things they feel they're good at, but they will shy away from things that they don't feel like they're already good at. So it could be a social situation, a party, or something like that. But think of it this way, it means we care. It means we care a lot about how we come across to people and what they think of us. It could be that we want to be respected or thought of as incredibly competent. So yay us. It's good we care about all this stuff. But how can we manage this so it doesn't become so overwhelming that we avoid, or maybe act in an aloof way? Kind of like what I was saying earlier, the person who's like, oh yeah, I got this, no big deal, right? It's not very vulnerable to be able to say that. And whenever we're not vulnerable, we're missing connection with other people. So here's an idea. Try opening up just a little bit. Just open up to other perspectives. If you're someone who maybe you're kind of married to your own particular thought or way of doing things, and it's like my way or the highway, maybe see what happens when you're just open to other people's perspectives. Being open doesn't mean that you agree. It doesn't mean that you automatically agree. It just means that you're just open to something. You're open to hearing it. You're open to considering it. Could be opening up to new ideas or strategies to see if we can tolerate feedback without falling apart. This is hard to do, right? Life is truly better when we learn to not take ourselves too seriously, only seriously enough when the situation calls for it. I totally remember being in high school, and I was part of the choir and then kind of part of this side group where we did a little bit of like, I don't even remember what it was called, but it was kind of like a pop and show routine. And so I can remember we were meeting with our choreographer, and this was my senior year of high school, and I was like, man, I had senioritis. I was just ready to get out of that school, and was just kind of wanting to not necessarily be there. But, I had committed to this pop and show choir and was really trying to work hard at it. I think my high school boyfriend and I had just broken up. There was kind of some stress. And I remember our choreographer came, and there was this one part where I just wasn't really getting the choreography all that great. And I remember she did this thing where she just was simply trying to help me with it. And she was really, really kind about it. But I remember breaking down into tears, and I had to leave and go to the bathroom and kind of just collect myself. And my choir teacher came in to talk to me, and I just remember telling her how stressed I was. And I don't remember if I went home straight after that or not. I may have gone back in, but what I also remember about that is that choreographer never gave me any other feedback. And I think as a result, I was really hesitant with some of the choreography, and maybe probably wasn't as good at it as the rest of the group. So, there's a part where we want to care seriously enough that, I care enough to learn so that I'm part of a team, I'm part of a group, I can support the other people. But in that moment, I really cared too seriously that someone just giving me some really kind and normal feedback that was helpful just broke me, because I was so stressed and because I cared way too much. I was taking it too seriously that I should just have this, I should already be good at this, right? And so RODBT is a great type of therapy that helps us to learn how to lean into the parts that this is awesome, that I cared a lot about doing a good job, but it was not awesome that I kind of broke down whenever I received some really kind feedback. So I love using RODBT with clients who are kind of more in that social anxiety kind of place, and it works in some ways with that generalized anxiety or worry. So it's kind of cool. If you're a provider and you haven't looked into RODBT and you think you might enjoy some of this, I highly recommend looking into it. They have some great 1-day, 2-day seminars, and then of course the intensive training, which is what I did, which is the 2 weeks. So it's really cool. Okay, I think I got sidetracked. Panic attacks. This is a great time to ask for help if you can. I know it's vulnerable to do this, but as Brene Brown says, vulnerability breeds connection, or she says something to that effect. And connection is pretty much the antidote for most things. There's this really great quote, I think more in the addiction world, that says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Isn't that so cool? I love that. So if anyone can sit with you to help you breathe through the attack, that's one idea. Maybe just getting eye contact with someone who knows you and just saying, hey, can you come here, or just motioning or something like that. Or if you're someone who can tell when it's coming on, maybe call someone and just see if they'll sit on the phone with you. You can do things like try pretending you're blowing out a candle across the room. Try square breathing. Square breathing is one of my favorite things. I do this sometimes just to go to sleep at night. If I'm kind of ruminating a little bit and noticing that, I might do square breathing. Think of it like you're drawing a square just in your imagination. And so you breathe in for 4 counts and hold it for 4 counts. And then you breathe out for 4 counts and hold it for 4 counts. And so you're just kind of drawing a square with your breathing in. Hold it, breathe out, hold it. And then you do that several times. You can also try diaphragmatic breathing by placing a hand over your stomach and feel it expand as you breathe in and contract as you breathe out. If you notice yourself breathing and your shoulders go up, you're probably not doing diaphragmatic breathing. So it's easier if you lie down, but you'll want to lie down and just put your hand on your stomach. A lot of people don't know this, but when you breathe in and fill your lungs, your stomach actually goes out. And then when you breathe the air out, your stomach contracts and it goes back in. So you can try that. You can lean on that person if you can, thank them for being there with you. Try processing what you were feeling if this is a safe person. And again, just remember, vulnerability breeds connection. People like to help, most people. I know there are exceptions. All right, so in closing, we have a few different things. We have intentionality. We have that we care so much. We have opportunities to practice vulnerability. And we have that just enough of a push sometimes to help us take action and plan something great, but in a flexible way. So be adaptable when the situation calls for it. Lean into your anxiety, be grateful for it. Ask what it's trying to do for you. Ask what that unmet need is. Be glad that your body and your mind have ways of helping us grow and learn about ourselves and about our environment. Well, that's pretty much it. Here, let me stop sharing and get back to you guys. All right, here we go. Thank you so much for listening and being here and being present. I hope that this was something that you were able to learn from just for yourself. And yeah, so if you guys have any questions, or if you are looking for supervision, if you are looking for therapy, something like that, send us an email, info@harmonytherapygroup.com. All right. Thanks so much.